3D Printing Today, show number 434, minimizing tool changes, printing Analinda, getting off of Simplify 3D for the Toolchanger.
Welcome back to 3D Printing Today, the podcast about all aspects of 3D printing. Hobby, professional, industrial, it does not matter. We cover it all. My name's Andy Cohen, and I'm here with Mr. Whitney Potter.
How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing pretty good. So you see that article about greenwashing?
Greenwashing in the 3D printing world? I can't imagine.
Well, the way things go with articles on 3D printing, it's usually hyperbole most of the time. Mm-hmm. I like to call it hyperbole.
Hyperbole? I like that. I think of it as hyperbole.
Hyperbole. Yeah. I like that's a better way of saying it. Let the British say hyperbole.
Yeah. Do they say hyperbole?
I have no idea. Anyway, it's a lot of hype. Yes. Anyway, and this is an article that tries to point that out. An individual whose name is Roland Berger.
So this is sort of a
he's
researcher,
a consultant,
a consultancy firm.
I'd like to point out that it's an international management
consultancy
firm.
Yeah, so Roland Berger, I don't know, is actually an individual. I think that's just the consultancy.
Anyway, he comes up with this article that says most of what they're saying about industrial 3D printing is kind of misleading and it's superficial and, well, he says potentially misleading in terms of sustainability and how green it is. Mm-hmm. And as you read into this article, which, by the way, comes out of 3dprintingindustry.com, it's an article about his paper. And it's kind of like he's pointing out that to develop the part takes even more carbon emissions than if you're using traditional methods. Now, I'm a little lost here. I don't understand. How are you developing it all that much differently than how you develop one that's been milled, a part that's been milled versus
right.
what you're developing it the same way. You're going to go on your CAD system and you're going to work, unless he's thinking you use tooling to develop. I don't understand.
Well, what I'm looking at, I guess, is for my interpretation at least, is if we're looking at an aluminum aerospace part, so a seat bracket or something that has to meet all of the qualifications, but that could be 3D printed, right? So if you are machining it out of a block of 7075 aluminum, right? You basically have this rather large block of aluminum, which you are there are environmental costs to producing that. Aluminum is extremely energy intensive to produce, so you can look at all the energy that's involved in producing the large block of aluminum, where you're milling away most of it to produce your finished part. And then you look at the amount of aluminum that's, the powder that you're actually using, right? But of course, producing the, 3D printer level powder, there's, a lot of energy expenditures in that, in I don't know what the atomizing, powder production process is, that, may be more energy intensive than just making a block, but you're using less of the powder. You're only using up the powder, unless there's support material or something. And then they're also going into the analysis of if you've got this sort of like super refined, optimized topology of your part through finite element analysis or whatever, showing, we don't need this extra material here because it doesn't see any stress, sort of thing. We've talked about that in the past. Yeah. And things that you can only produce on a 3D printer, it's not practical to mill certain, geometries, whereas 3D printing, you're much more flexible. So you can make a much lighter, stronger part 3D printing. And in an aerospace application, if you've got, two of these holding down every seat in a 777 or whatever, then the fuel savings,
weight. Sure,
right?
But that's not after that. That's after development. That's
right.
That's production.
Yeah.
In the article, it says in development.
Yeah, I'm just interpreting that from an infographic I'm seeing in here, but
maybe the writer of this article in 3D printing industry got it wrong, possibly. But then again, if they got it wrong, then it doesn't make sense after the fact, because after the fact in production, it does save in its the part's actual use. So there's a lot of this article doesn't make any sense, and what kind of shows how much it doesn't make sense is if you look at the image, the cover image of Roland Berger's Sustainable AM report.
Yes.
Right? He himself made it according to that label. And it's a make-believe 3D printer.
Yeah, it's some bizarro futuristic. I don't know how many axes of freedom we're looking at there. And it's also kind of, to my mind, a sort of a nonsensical design. Why you would have a, looks like, what is that, an Ultimaker control system on the top if you're then going to have...
I don't know what that is.
6 or 8 DOF
he photoshopped
arms attached to that.
He photoshopped pieces from all sorts of machines and stuck it together. Anyway...
It's kind of silly, but anyways.
We do agree that chances are there is some greenwashing going on. I mean,
always.
Yeah, I mean, for example,
right.
in the materials themselves, there's no way you're going to get any kind of sustainability or... low impact on the environment if everybody's using different materials. Mm-hmm. Because if everybody's using different materials, closed loop recycling is impossible.
Oh, particularly with polymers.
Sure.
I think this was more oriented towards industrial metal printing.
But even industrial metal printing, there's going to be mixing of chemicals into the powders to get it to work in certain ways, which means when that part's kaput, you're not going to be able to crush it up and use that material someplace else.
Yeah, and if you think it's difficult to separate polymers when you've got prints with PLA from different manufacturers, try separating polymers or separating materials where you've got metal powder from
that's not
different alloys. Yeah.
So we kind of agree, but this article's kind of nonsensical.
I think it's important to look at each use case, because think about it so much matters how much you're producing in plastic 3D printing versus injection molding, right? I mean, we always kind of look at that as a trade-off. And if you're somewhere less than 100,000 pieces or something, you're probably, depending on how complex the pattern is, you're probably better off 3D printing them. But once you jump up to the
tens of thousands
range, wherever the break-even point is, your cost per unit, it goes down so dramatically.
So long as those parts are actually used,
right? And
so long as they're actually, if they're warehoused and tossed, that's what we're trying to avoid,
right?
Really.
Yeah, and I'm trying to avoid just 3D printing a whole lot of stuff and tossing it myself just because I can. Yep. But anyways, so interesting article. I'm not really sure the truth of where the truth lies there.
Anyway, what's coming up on our show this week?
We're going to start out talking about minimizing tool changes.
We're going to print the very popular test print named Analinda,
which you printed on the Toolchanger, right?
Yes, in color.
Yes, and then our third it's all Toolchanger show, right?
Yes, I think it is.
Because then we're going to talk about getting off of Simplify 3D for the Toolchanger.
In actuality, the first segment, that applies to any multi-materials kind of printing.
Sure.
So maybe the name of this segment should have been minimizing color changes or minimizing material changes, because I think that this applies to every method of multi-materials printing. And let's see if we can review them all. So you've got your filament switchers, the MMU, the 3D Chameleon, the Rabbit, that crazy rabbit thing that you can get from China.
So that's basically one hot end that you are pulling the filament out of and sticking a different filament into.
Yeah, you automatically withdraw the filament and automatically send new filament back in there, and you have to purge your nozzle. So that's one approach. The other approach is you splice the colors together in a timed manner, which is the palette, Mosaic's palette.
Did anybody else ever try that other than Mosaic? I can't remember.
There was another company.
There was another one?
They never got to full production.
Okay, yeah. That's a very thorny problem.
It's a tricky problem. We had success with the palette and the original palette for about 2 weeks. And then for the life of me, no matter what, I couldn't figure out how to get reliability in the splicing back. I sent our palette to Mosaic. They turned it into a Palette Plus, and it still could not be reliable on the splicing.
Yeah.
We've never gotten their latest system. We didn't buy it, so we don't have it. I've looked and lurked on forums and Facebook groups and seen people have been able to use it and been able to get good quality, and people have been able to get good color prints with the MMU2 from Prusa with their Mark IIIs. So, filament switching and filament splicing can work, but what I'm about to tell folks applies to those as well as tool changing and IDEXs. IDEX is when you have two hot ends traveling in the x-axis and one goes off to the side while the other one prints. It's also the same for dual extruders, which is what we used to do before we got other means for doing it. And that's minimize the changes because each change
is a possible failure point, or actually several possible failure points.
Exactly. So, and with probability theory, each of those points multiplies the how much you're going to take off the probability of success. So, of course, you want to minimize those. And how do you do that? Well, you start with your object itself. You design your object in such a manner so that it could be placed in such a manner so that you have the most color in one axis, so you don't need to constantly change to a different filament, to a different tool. Another way, which worked brilliantly on the palette, and for some reason it no longer functions since we got the Toolchanger, and that's sequential part printing. If you were to take 4 objects and put them on your bed, and you can tell any of these devices, that any of these means that do it, to print this way. Instead of printing, say you have one in red, one blue, one green, one yellow. Okay? Instead of printing continuously, where it'll go to blue and print it in blue, then go to red, change out the color,
print a layer in
print
blue.
it in red, and then go one layer, and then go. Instead of doing that, you print for a specific height on that one object for multi-layers. And that height is a function of the room around your hot end.
Right, the clearance. Yeah.
Right, and the ideal is to keep it within like 1 or 2 millimeters. So you'll save maybe 300% of your changes.
So you'll print 10 or 20 layers at a time and then move on to the next one.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're dramatically saving, assuming that your y-axis is accurate and going, and there's no backlash in your y-axis, or in your z-axis rather.
Yeah, and the other now if you've got an object where the colors are all contiguous, so it's like a multi-part object that you want to colorize, that gets tricky. So you can't go very high,
right? Because
if you go too high, you'll
get
crash.
The other color in.
So here's an example of where I got too high, and it crashed and knocked me out of register.
Yeah.
So you really could only go maybe 1 or 2 layers to save, but even 1 or 2 layers is a significant savings when it's a 16 to 25 hour print.
Yeah.
You're talking of a huge pile of priming and purging
that you're not having to do.
You don't have to do. Now, unfortunately, for purge towers, you still have to increase that height. You still have to maintain that height. So you're still printing your purge tower, and it's still pretty big. But if you're only priming, as with the Toolchanger, you're talking significant savings. Now, I used to do this with Simplify 3D, and Simplify 3D will no longer let me do it, and I don't know why. On this particular print that I'm showing you right now, Whitney, and I'll put this on our forum, this is actually Prusa Slicer. And Prusa Slicer will let you switch to sequential object printing. And I don't know how this happened because I didn't switch that. But in my preview, I looked at it, and it generated a little bit of height right there. And it crashed the extruder. But that's the ideal thing to do. Minimize those tool changes, minimize those color changes, and your reliability goes way up. It's a significant thing. How do you do that? Placement, design, and your settings. So we print for two different reasons. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I mean, I'm not going to take words out of your mouth. You say it. Why do you 3D print?
Well, it's changed a bit over the years. I 3D printed because it was cool and because I was learning things about how to print and what I could print. And now I 3D print something when there's something that I want that is best to be made by 3D printing. But that's I have an end in mind, and I don't 3D print things just because I can anymore, because I've thrown away too many garbage cans full of stuff that I 3D printed in the early days just because I could.
Yeah. Well, I 3D print. I've 3D printed for just about every use case. I've 3D printed to fix things in my home. I've 3D printed as a business, a service. I still do. I've 3D printed to generate items that may be used by others for fun. But the use case I want to talk about now is a different type of use case. And my bet is most of the people that listen to this podcast use this use case.
Okay.
And the best analogy I have for this use case is golf.
Uh-huh.
I play golf.
Okay.
No, I don't. I hate the game. I despise the game. I don't want to go near. I got golf clubs. I used to play it and I don't want to play this game anymore. But the process of golf is to this use case is the same.
Uh-huh.
I see an object. It's kind of like the hole, you know.
Right.
I see the object and I see how hard it is to complete. It's the par.
Yep.
And I think, how could I succeed with that object? So I'm thinking about the clubs I'm going to use and where I'm going to shoot. And the act of trying to print the object, the time involved, the thrill of it, the excitement of it, the challenge of it, and I think the best part is the reward at completion at the end is why I do it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I admit I've got piles of prints over the years. There was a time, and I mentioned it on this podcast, where I would just randomly go into Thingiverse and not even care what the thing is and print it, just so I could print it.
Yeah.
And I would print and print and print and print.
Until you got them perfect.
Until I got them. And it's to a point now where it's, kind of like a professional golfer, where I believe my skill is at a level where one stab, I should be able to get it. The minimum amount. The typical way, if you've got a thing you're going to be printing, and you're going to be printing hundreds of them, you're going to find your optimal settings, you're going to find the optimal task flow, and eventually you're going to hit on it, get your recipe, and then you're going to print them over and over and over again.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I still do that. I'm still in that mode where someone will come to me and need that, or I may have a project like the stuff from my Christmas lights, or I'm going to print it hundreds of times. But what I'm talking about now is the ideal is to get it to print as little times as possible and get it in the hole.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's the golf metaphor.
It's the golf metaphor. Okay.
See, the thing is, when I look at golf, I look and go, God, what a waste of water and pesticide and herbicide and gas, and I just don't see the point. But
okay, and you can argue the same thing here. What a waste of electricity and time and plastic. Yeah, and I would agree with that.
I'm glad I know how to get a ball in the hole if I need to, though. I can just
pick
walk
it up
over and drop it in. Exactly.
Right. And if you need to get something produced, you could get it produced.
Right.
Unfortunately, I admit it's not ecologically an ideal hobby. I admit that. Okay.
But if you're pushing the bounds of what can be done with it, there's value in that.
Yeah. And that's the reason why I really wanted the E3D Toolchanger. Because the E3D Toolchanger, and soon the new Prusa XL, which is going to be another step in my, I hope. But the E3D Toolchanger represented like the ultimate set of golf clubs. And it has. I've had it now for 2 years, maybe a little longer than 2 years. It's on its third set of extruders, extruder feeders. I'm sorry. The actual hot ends are still the original E3D V6s. Never changed those. Even the nozzles are the originals. I have changed out the nozzles, but none of them worked as well as the originals.
There you go.
Which goes counter to a segment that I think we've already recorded about buying cheapy nozzles.
Well, it's good to know.
Yeah. But this we've already gone way beyond what I wanted to do here. But this segment is supposed to be about the episode of learning to print Analinda. Analinda is a multi-materials print, a dragon made by a Thingiverse user whose handle is known as Luby.
This is the Luby dragon, but in full color or multicolor parts.
It's a very well designed, cartoonish like dragon with a beautiful wing set, and it's designed in such a way for minimal supports. And Luby generated it as a multi-part, multi-materials printout. And there were a couple of them in 2019's MRF where people who were beta testing the E3D Toolchanger actually had color. Analinda's there. I never printed it, and now it was my time to print it using the new V2 orbiters that we've installed on the Toolchanger. And it was an adventure. So the first try, I get maybe an hour into the print, and for some reason, the extrusion of the first extruder stopped. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, clog. So I go out there and I open up the orbiter and I shove the filament down, and no, there's no clog in there. But I try to feed more filament and I see I've got crossover on the spool. Crossover is when the filament is overlaying itself and you can't see it. And in this case, it was invisible to me. There was no way to predict it was going to be there. The spool had always worked fine for me in the past, but it ruined the print. Luckily, it was only an hour or so into the print. This was a 26, 27 hour print. Okay, so second try. I start printing and I go out there, and then now we're talking 8 hours or 9 hours because it's the next day. I went to bed and it was printing fine. I come out and I get this weird result where one color looked like it was running for a while and all the other colors are out there as strings as if something went wrong. But the Toolchanger, when something goes wrong, it's really kind of catastrophic. So I went out there and I look at the console in the Duet console, and it says you've got one of your heaters has gone out of excursion. In other words, it's not staying within the envelope of its heat range. I'm like, oh no, which one is it? And I figure out it's the one that's the first extruder the second extruder. So I got one that's green and one that's brown, one that's blue and one that's red.
Okay.
So I'm printing the main body in green and brown. The brown was printing, but the brown extruder is sitting there in hold as if something's wrong. That's the one where the heater was not working up to par. Now, if the heater is really broken and not working and it fails, your firmware, no matter what you're using, will know right away because the circuit's open. It's not closed.
Well, it should know.
It should know.
It's very dangerous if it doesn't know and is not keeping an eye on what's going on with it.
But that's not the error message I got. The error message I got was it's just not keeping it hot enough, fast enough. Okay, so this was the third time this has happened to me in the past 2 years. These heaters start to fail by not having like if you look at a coil of wire that's heated up, if it should be red across the entire coil.
Right.
But what I believe is happening is it's not fully red. There are portions of it which are staying dark, and
so it's shorting.
It's starting to go bad.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And when it starts to short, then it's drawing less current and producing less heat.
That's the theory. I don't know this for sure, but in the end,
it should be drawing more current if it's shorting. Sorry, go on.
Regardless, it's not working.
It's not working.
The way the Duet measures it is
is the heat. It's looking at the thermistor.
Yeah.
And if the thermistor's saying it's not as hot as it should have been, stop everything.
And of course, the thermistor can be going bad too.
I've never had a thermistor go bad.
No, I have.
Either it works or it doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
And I always thought either the heater works or it doesn't work
Uh-huh.
until I got the Toolchanger.
Interesting.
And these are the E3D heaters. They're all original heaters, original equipment. So I replaced, in my experience, no matter what I try to do, even though I hit the tune, I tune PID control and Duet, you M303, you tell it which extruder, and it does it all automatically, and then you hit M500, it puts it into an override file, and at the end of your config file, you do, I think it's an M501, which tells the Duet firmware at the bottom, go look at the overrides, and it knows what the PID curve should be. I did all that, and again, my third try,
no luck.
It died.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I change out the heater, and I go for my fourth try.
Okay. And did you recalibrate the PID after you changed the heater out?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. What's wonderful about the Duet is you just hit M303, and it does it for you. M303, then M500, and you're done.
It'd be nicer if it just had a button that said calibrate PID.
Yeah, that would work well.
Anyways, go on.
Open source, man. It's open source. Anyway, so fifth try, I'm like, get out there the next morning. Again, extruder number 1, the green filament, crossover.
Uh-huh.
Sixth try, finally. I think I left out a couple, but I think it took me 8 tries to finally get an acceptable Analinda. Now, this Analinda that I showed you, and it's on our forum. If you look up Orbiter V2s, that there's a long thread in what we did there and how that all worked out. But this Analinda does have a defect, and you can't really see it, but it's one little part in the layer, the extrusion, it kind of missed it. I think either a string was in the way or something kind of clogged a tiny bit in the extruder, so it's not a perfect line right there. Otherwise, it came out
beautiful.
Optimal, optimal print.
Yeah.
What I love is that the lines between the two colors are nice and clean, almost as if it's a multi-part model glued together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really nicely done.
Except with the geometry of it, you would have a hard time doing that.
That's right. You wouldn't be able to fit the parts together.
So yeah, no, it's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Good job. Yeah, the Toolchanger, it's like you think of everything that can go wrong, with a 3D printer, and then not only do you have 4 things that can go wrong, but any one of those can go wrong. So you're dramatically increasing your failure modes.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. And you might think you're in good shape when you print with one extruder, and then you print with each one individually, and it looks great. Mm-hmm. Then you start to print multi-materials. It's a whole new game.
Right.
Everything's different.
Yep.
As everybody who's about to get their Prusa XL is going to find out. So we already talked about how Prusa's kind of taking things away from Thingiverse with prusaprinters.org.
Well, I don't think they're taking it away, but they're putting their own.
They're saying, no, we know how to do it better, and we're going to do it better, and they are doing it better.
Well,
they are, because they care about it.
Yeah.
They're curating it. They're taking care of it, and they're not neglecting it and ignoring it the way some people do for Thingiverse. Mm-hmm. And I respect that a lot. And I really like going to prusaprinters.org. And Prusa Research is doing something else that is similar to that in the slicer world. Prusa has licensed Slicer with a 3, Slicer, whatever it was called.
Yep.
And it's branched into Prusa Slicer.
Okay.
Now there's another branch called Super Slicer, which I have yet to utilize. I haven't tried it yet, but I've been spending a lot of time with Prusa Slicer, and I think I'm going to be moving off of Simplify 3D for the Toolchanger. I'll probably still use Simplify 3D for other machines, but for the Toolchanger,
it's time to switch and get off of Simplify 3D. Let me tell you how crazy Simplify 3D is for the Toolchanger. So you have a process for each bunch of objects that you want in a particular color. So you have 4 extruders, which means you're going to have at least 4 processes. Okay? And now, I'm not going to talk about when you have multiple processes per set of objects for one extruder, because that's when things go really crazy. But to give you an idea of how crazy this gets, so my task flow for developing my file in Simplify 3D with the Toolchanger was start with one process. Okay. Don't put any objects in there yet. Make sure that my settings for my extruders are all the same. I keep all my tools the same. If you've got different tools on your extruders, it's complicated. So they're all V6s. They're all the same feeders. They're all the same material. So I go into that first tab and I've got 4 extruders set up. I go to each one, click on each one, and make sure each one's settings are all the same. That's 4 for one process. 4 extruders, one process.
Uh-huh.
If I don't do that, when I switch processes, the wrong setting that's on one of those 4 extruders is going to stick. And it's not going to be what I want it to be in the middle of the print. Okay, so remember, that's 4 extruders for 4 processes. That's 16 batches of settings.
Right.
It gets worse.
Oh, yeah.
So, you go to the next tab, which is I think it's the layer tab, and that's for that process. That's all you have to worry about. If you say which models you want, that's for just that process. You don't have to worry about it. But when you get the temperature, yeah, you got to worry about it, because you got to make sure that the extruder that's doing the layers that you've set. So you got to get the layers. You set it for the extruder that you want. You go to additions, say, for example, a skirt.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure it's the skirt that you want. You don't necessarily need a skirt for a Toolchanger because you're priming. You're priming before you print. So you don't need a skirt. So I just turn them all off. I turn all the additions off. And you go to temperature. You've got to make sure that the temperature is correct for the extruder that is for that bunch of objects in that process. So there's 4 extruders. You got to go through each one of them. And I just turn the ones that I'm not using for that process to 0. And the extruder that meets that process is the right temperature.
Okay.
Okay. And
when you changed that hot end, does it then turn all your other heaters off?
No.
Okay.
They go into idle.
Okay.
They go to their idle setting.
Okay.
Thankfully. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. But when I'm in that process, it should put them all to 0. It doesn't work that way.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Anyway, and then make the next process, and all that copies over. So I make my 4 processes. I add, and then I go to the first one, and I put the objects into that one, which objects are going to print in that color, and I do it for all the other 3. And then I hit the print button, I hit sequential printing, and I usually do it like 0.4 to 0.6 initially. If I go any higher, I can bump into things. But lately, that's not working. That stopped working completely. And I then make sure that each of the objects are going to print in the right way, the way I want them to. Some things to keep in mind while you're setting these things is how many outlines or walls do you want? Remember, for each object's going to have its own bunch of walls, and that's a lot added printing. There's a lot more there. You may not need that.
Right.
So it's what you're going to have to figure out, and you look at your previews to figure that out. But man, Simplify 3D is ridiculous. You go to Prusa Slicer, you don't have to do any of that. You just you got the settings for the 4 extruders, and you associate which extruder goes to which of the parts that you have downloaded, and that's it. That's all you have to do. It's printing really, really well. I'm very impressed. Plus, you've got a whole bunch of new settings that have evolved since Simplify 3D has been published.
it's just not worth it anymore. There's no value to it.
Wow, that's yeah. My feeling about Simplify 3D, the stuff I've used it on lately, like the diamond color blending hot end, was the last time I really got deeply into Simplify 3D. And Simplify is certainly a misnomer. It was sort of allowed you to get more complicated. There was nothing simple about it, but it allowed you to do things that no other slicer allowed you to. It wasn't necessarily easy to. I mean, I did a print where I was doing 30 or 40 different color blends and had to have different processes defined for each one of them, and then had to have the default purge blocks that it produces didn't work because of where it was putting them on the bed was colliding with things, so I had to make my own purge blocks manually. But with Simplify 3D, I was able to do all of that. It took the better part of a day to get a setup for one print. But
I highly recommend try those in Prusa Slicer.
Well, I took the diamond hot end off my machine years ago. I didn't really see the point in that after I had kind of realized what its shortcomings were.
Yeah. Boy, Whitney, another show written to the hard drive, waiting for encoding, uploading, and commitment on our feed to all of our very supportive listeners. Thank you all out there for your support on Patreon. Thank you for your positive reviews. We do appreciate those. And thanks for listening. We do it for you. We do it for fun. We just like to make things and talk about it, I guess. Hey, I got a thing of the week.
Yep.
And this is an easy print, something we probably all could use. If you use WD-40 or any kind of a spray can that uses a straw, tiny straw. But I think the can size is kind of important. Here's a thing where you print it in TPU and it straps around the can and it's got a little hook to hold the straw so you don't lose the dang thing.
Don't lose that tiny little straw.
Because they always get lost. It never fails.
Yep.
This is the WD-40 400 milliliter TPU straw holder V2. Hey, I wonder, is that the same size can that they sell here in the U.S.? I just realized it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting that the can, all the writing on the can below WD-40 multi-use product, all the rest of it is in, I think that's Czech.
It could very well be.
Judging by the maker.
Yeah, the maker whose handle on Thingiverse is what? Flower?
Flower? Flowr, otherwise known as Jindrich Solar from Czechia. Which is more popularly known as the Czech Republic in our country, at least, although Czechia is their assuming I'm pronouncing that properly, is their official name.
I think that's a cool name. I think they should continue using it. Chechnya. Anyway.
Well, they're not Chechnya.
Chechia. Oh, that's why. That's the problem.
That it's too easily confused.
Yeah, I think so.
But anyway, thank you, Flower, for this contribution. And I think there are a few remixes out there for different size cans. So if the WD-40 in your part of the world comes in a different size can, I'm just amazed that you can get WD-40 so far abroad.
Yeah, so am I. You can get WD-40, but you can't get Aquanet.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's thing number 5354341. If you've got a tip, a question, or a candidate thing of the week, send us an email. Let us know.
Send it to info@3dprintingtoday.com. That's THREE, the letter D, printingtoday.com.
And let's see, we do invite you to join our Google group, our forum. Go to Google and type in 3D printing tips and tricks. And when you get there, hit the join button and give them an email. And then you can post. We do have a show next week, Whitney.
We do. We start out by following a trail of fails.
And then we ask the question, is it a hardware fail or software?
And then we have a look at fangs.com.
I guess that's it.
Great. Thanks for listening.